Hey guys, we're moving into a new topic today. Before we get to that, what we'll be talking about is market structures. You've got a practice problem here, and this problem actually came straight from the AP test. Okay, so if you're in good shape and you can do these, you're on the right track in terms of already doing it. So pause it, go ahead and run through. Notice the question is going to be answered in a way like you want to be able to label your answers. Okay, so you're going to put, there's going to be an answer for A, B, C, and D. Okay, so go ahead, pause it, run through that real quick, and then I'll go over the how I came up with the answer. Okay, so we're going to answer these one by one. Like I said, okay, you're going to answer it with A, B, C, D. Now, as you can see over here, okay, I went through and I did all of the, all of the math. Okay, I got things clearly labeled. I got X and country Y, and I've got everything labeled. I identified the comparative advantages. Okay, I put boxes around those. And I also down here, a little bit different than what we've done so far, is I identified the trade um, agreement. Okay, so as we get into that, I'll kind of mention that when we keep moving here. Okay, so after we do all that, notice, all right, for part A, we don't even need to do any math yet. It's asking us about the absolute advantage in producing solar panels. That's going to be country Y, and so obviously you can see how I have that labeled. Okay, part B is give us the opportunity cost of a furnace. So one furnace equals um, two solar panels for country Y. Okay. Which country has the comparative advantage? Remember, that's who gives up less. We already have that figured out. X has the comparative advantage. In furnaces, comparative advantage means I'm going to specialize. If I specialize, I'm going to export that product. Just another different way that they try to word some things. Okay. Now, the terms of trade are a little bit trickier. Okay, and the big key is that you've got to keep straight what you're trying to see. So that's why I list things in these columns. I have boxes. Okay, and so basically the terms of trade become, again, X is going to make solar panels. Okay, sorry, X is going to make uh, furnaces. Yeah, X is going to make furnaces because they have the comparative advantage. Sorry. All right. Now, the terms of trade are going to be one furnace equals a half of a solar panel, and one solar panel equals two furnaces. So basically, I just took that information, right? If the terms of trade were two furnaces for one solar panel, and it's asking us, should country X produce domestically, meaning not trade, or should they trade? Okay, so in this particular case, X is going to give two furnaces for each solar panel. So 2 equals 1, like we said. X's cost of domestically producing those things, okay, is 3/4 of a furnace. I get that number right here. Okay, so they have to produce, it's 3/4 of a furnace, okay, to make that one solar panel. Now, domestic production in this case is cheaper. They're giving up less. Remember, they'd have to give up two furnaces for every solar panel if they were to get better deals. Okay, so domestic production is cheaper than trade. Um, like I said, they're going to produce domestically. They would not trade in this case. Okay, for them to trade, they would have to get more than this 4/3 for their one furnace. That's what they would have to get. Obviously, they get less than 4/3 for that one furnace there. Okay, let's get into the stuff that we're going to talk about today. We are into a new set of notes here. They are going to look like this, okay? And they kind of get out of order just based on the format of the assignment. They get a little bit out of order in terms of what you're going to see, but that's okay. Okay, we're actually starting on page 3, and we're going to look at 5 questions all economies must answer. Okay, so We're talking about what are referred to as market systems today. And basically, how does a country figure out what they're going to, how they're going to produce stuff, right? One extreme, capitalism, no government rules. Okay, if you are complete capitalist, and then the other extreme is complete socialism, where the government makes every rule and the government controls those factors of production that we talked about earlier in class. Okay, so the first question that we've got to answer is what should be produced. Sometimes we're limited on what we can produce. Obviously, if there's different climates, different resources available in the ground, that's going to affect what we're able to produce. But for the most part, the United States is extremely we have an extreme advantage. We're able to produce just about anything. The next thing we got to figure out is how should it be produced, which is basically like who's going to do it, right? United States, private citizens, they get together, they get all the factors of production together. They have to use their own money. Sometimes they can borrow it. Sometimes they can get investors to buy that stuff. And then they decide how it's going to be put together. Okay, so it's left up to the private citizens. We've got to figure out who gets what. Okay, and this is basically answered in the United States. Basically, you have to be able to afford something to be able to get it, right? So very simple. How do we figure out who gets it? Well, I have to be able to afford it to be able to obviously have it. Okay. Some countries they're going to distribute things a little bit more equally. Okay, in terms of if Venezuela is an extremely socialist economy, they basically get a certain ration of food when they go to the grocery store. So anyway, different countries have different ways of answering those. The fourth one is how are we going to accommodate change? So when we have especially like natural disasters, the United States, what happens is we have prices go up, right? If we get a product or I'm sorry, a good or service like ruined, for example, like romaine lettuce had like E. coli in it or something some time ago, and the price of romaine lettuce went way up. Okay, now in our world, obviously, if you don't want to pay that price, well, you're going to go buy something else. But we do have those things that occur. The way we accommodate changes, we have prices change. The market changes the price. How are we going to promote progress and efficiency? The United States way would be to reward people with profits. Okay, how do we get people to want to produce more stuff? Well, they earn an income. If they produce a really, really, really quality good or item, then they're going to make more money, and they're going to be willing to work at creating innovation, creating technology, and those types of things. Okay, so moving on to the economic goals, making sure that you guys know where you're writing these. Okay, each economy is going to can focus on a few different things. Okay, so your economic goals are you're going to fill in this table right here. It's set up just like what you see on the screen. Obviously, we're starting on the left, going to the right. So anyway, these are things that people are going to value, I guess. And so if you kind of look at these, economic freedom, I would say that is a very valued economic goal here in the United States. We like to spend our money on whatever we want. Okay. Now, the idea of economic freedom in the United States probably refers to the idea of not getting taxed, right? We don't like to pay taxes. On the flip side, we also know that if we don't have tax revenue from the government, they can't provide as much. Okay, so we like that private choice. We like to be able to do whatever we want. However, the flip side is the government can't produce nearly as much. Okay, and then we're going to piggyback that economic freedom into economic efficiency as well. So the idea in the United States is that if people can do what they want with their money, they're going to have a reason to use it wisely and invest in themselves and be able to be as efficient with what they're trying to produce as possible. The more efficient I am in producing stuff, the lower the cost, meaning I get to keep more profit. Okay, so I have a reason to be as efficient as possible because I have my resources going into that production of whatever product I'm going to produce. Okay, now if we were to focus only completely on economic efficiency and doing things as cheap as possible all the time, that could lead to some problems. In the United States, in the 1950s and 60s, we really saw a challenge with like pollution. The government wasn't involved in, regulating pollution like they are today. And again, to be as efficient as possible, it's cheaper to dump, my waste into a river, so to speak, than it is to pay someone to come and get it and dispose of it correctly. Okay, so sometimes that efficiency can lead to some bad things as well. Okay, economic equity and economic security. Two different things. I'll talk about economic security here in a second. So, equity is the idea that people are treated equal. Okay, this can kind of probably be defined a couple different ways. In the United States, we're going to define it as everybody has an equal shot at getting an education, whether it be a public education. Obviously, if you have access to a private education, you could take advantage of that if that is your particular situation. That's how we would argue economic equity. Okay, if you were going to live in the Soviet Union, economic equity would be argued by saying everybody's going to have a very, very, very similar income, right, and make the same amount of money. Obviously, you know, uh, defining it how we would define it, it's not perfect. Okay, so we know that not everybody has access to school, but Concord High School is different than, say, Indianapolis public schools or South Bend public schools or whatever. The schools aren't necessarily created equal, so it's not a perfect answer in terms of establishing that and creating it. Economic security has to do with taking care of people that can't take care of themselves. So it kind of obviously it says that right there. Think like Social Security. If you're familiar with Social Security, that is basically a person's income that once they reach a certain age, they're entitled to collect. Okay, so um, economic security is valued because it creates an income for people that obviously can't earn an income for themselves. Um, and it creates some economic stability, which we'll get to here in a second, for those people. They can quit, they can retire, right? They have an income. They may not have to live back with their kids afterwards, and that security is a good thing for them. Now, the challenges is that somebody's got to pay for it, right? So, if we're going to provide more economic security, we're going to raise taxes. We could have to raise taxes. Another quick example of the economic security is the stimulus checks that we've gotten for the COVID stuff. Okay, that's economic security. The idea is that some people aren't making as much money as they were. The government's going to supplement their income. Okay, now the challenge is in the long run, can the government, you know, spend that much money and not go into extreme debt to be able to sustain the ability to take care of people in the future? The fifth one, economic stability, probably the most important one, simply because if we don't have confidence in the economy, then we're not going to spend money. If we don't spend money, then we're not going to create jobs and incomes for other people. Okay, so economic stability is going to just be the general idea that prices, and we'll also say incomes, are going to stay stable, right? So like the price of gas, it might go up a little bit, but kind of think about what you would do if all of a sudden you heard that gas prices were going to go up to $6 or $7 a gallon here in the very near future. You're probably going to have to save your money, which means you're not creating jobs elsewhere, right? Going out to eat or doing those types of things. Um, and there's certain things the government can do to maintain that stability. They tried it with just this aforementioned stimulus check, right? They're trying to give people the confidence that they're going to have some income so they can go and spend it in the economy, right? When the COVID stuff had really initially first started, and restaurants and all these places were shut down, people didn't know when their next paycheck was going to come. That was a scary time for a lot of people, and so when they didn't know that, they're not going to spend their money on stuff, right? So they're not going to create incomes for others. And then the last one, we've got economic growth. It focuses on the economy growing, our population grows. Obviously, we need more jobs out there as we move into the future, as people graduate high school and college and all that stuff. We need our economy to grow. We need more stuff, right? Even if you just look at the population of the world, like and how much food we have to produce, we need to be able to grow in those circumstances. Okay, so next spot is we are going to the types of economies in the world. Okay, and here's where we are at on your notes. Okay, we're back on this front page. Okay, so just like anything else, all right, you can see these are the things that we've got to fill in across the top. This is traditional economies. We're going to answer these questions as we go forward. Okay, just like anything else, all right, economies over time have evolved. People's populations have become larger. Technology allows us to be able to focus on more things than just like food production. But starting with the first economies of the world, even if we're just talking about like a two-person economy, right, where there was only two people, like their main focus on what should be produced are going to be things that they need. They got to find their food, probably some type of clothing, whatever, right? Maybe weapons or whatever to try to catch food or whatever. And they're going to focus on producing things that are needed. And they're going to learn how to do those things. Maybe those skills get passed on from a parent or even a grandparent or whatever. It's going to be how things are always done. And obviously, in these smaller economies, it's going to be distributed to people that need it. Okay, and people that we don't need to overproduce because again, there's probably not too many situations where we can sell our product somewhere. And again, we're just trying to survive. All right. A good example of these economies would be like Native Americans. Okay, so like the Native Americans, in the United States, they produced what they needed. They didn't really have much currency to worry about having to exchange with other tribes. They were focused on staying alive. Okay, and there are still some of these types of societies still out there. Probably specifically in Africa and South America, there's some of those tribal societies that live in those rural areas and in those particular areas that do still live like this. The disadvantages is obviously it's not an economy that you and I would be familiar with, right? It's an extremely, well, I don't want to call it simple because it's probably extremely difficult, but they're focused on survival. That's not how you and I would be, that's not how you and I would say that we want to live our day-to-day lives. Now, as some of these economies started becoming more successful and becoming bigger, think like the Mayans and the Aztecs started out as Native Americans, kind of got into obviously huge population centers for those different societies and cultures. Where in a traditional economy you might have like the head of a household, maybe a tribal leader. That's kind of how things were always done. Well, when these societies become super large, their idea was, hey, listen, we have this leader, this tribal leader or chief or whoever. That's kind of how it's always been done, and now we just have more people that they are overseeing, right? So in command economies, the government's deciding how it's produced, what's produced, who gets what. The government's going to decide that stuff. All right. The advantages are is that the government's able to provide things for people. However, the disadvantages are that there are no incentives for you to overproduce and produce more, right? And because obviously in a capitalist economy, then you're going to be able to, sell your overproduction. That doesn't necessarily exist in these cases. Modern examples, the Soviet Union, which is not called the Soviet Union anymore, is now called Russia. So the Soviet Union through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, even before that, Cuba and North Korea are probably the best examples. I could throw China in there as well, but in fact, China is actually coming up with um, some capitalist policies that allow people to keep a little bit more of their profit than they had in the past. Okay, so we talk about the Aztecs, the Mayans. We also see these economies with like a king and a queen, right? And even through like the 1700s into Great Britain and England, they had a king and a queen. Well, when the government isn't able to sustain their production or their dispersion of goods, it makes people upset. Obviously, in the United States, we came up with capitalism, right? Notice my example though, okay, is that the United States pre 1900s, before the 1900s, the government was extremely hands off, laissez faire. You might have heard that term. So we know private individuals decide things. this invisible hand sets prices, okay? And again, if people are willing to buy it, then the price will go up. If people aren't buying it, then the price goes down, and eventually I stop producing it. So private individuals make all these decisions. Now, for who it gets produced, it's going to be people that can afford stuff. We know the advantages, the freedom of job choice. The disadvantages, though, is that since the government doesn't tell anybody what to do, they don't have any tax revenue, and so they don't do very much stuff for the citizens. Okay, so if you are familiar with like the New Deal, which we'll get to here in a second, that is a completely philosophical shift of how the United States were viewing the economy, okay, up until that time in the 1930s. So at this point, pre 1900s, the government does absolutely basically nothing. Okay, even in the case like we really didn't even have that much of a military. We had to get the military going in World War One, and even in World War Two, we created a military rather than sustained a military for those types of things. So the government completely hands off. It's good if you're successful. It's bad if you can't support yourself. Okay, we can draw this. We can draw what is referred to as the circular flow model, and basically, it's just how money flows through an economy. We've got households and businesses, okay, and households sell factors of production, basically their labor, right? And that goes into, businesses are going to hire you. You're selling your labor, right? Businesses provide stuff, whether it be a physical good or a service. So something like, a restaurant provides food, a haircut is a service, right? So, and again, that stuff goes into households. Okay, so the money only flows through with no government, okay, households and firms. Okay, so um, anyway, the United States ran into some problems with this model, and what they found was that the government can actually make things a little bit better if they get involved sometimes. It's specifically the New Deal, okay, we see the creation of Social Security, we see the creation of unemployment insurance, we see a whole bunch of things that the government starts providing for people, and it creates stability for a whole lot more people than when they didn't provide anything for anybody. And so the idea of mixed economies is that the government's going to oversee some things. They're going to play this referee, okay? They're a referee trying to, make the right amount of rules. Do we have too many rules sometimes? Absolutely. Do we not have enough rules sometimes? Absolutely. But you see that it's trying to maximize the the good about the government getting involved, so socialist policies, and also the good of the economic freedom. Okay, basically every country in the world today is some type of mixed economy. Okay, so whereas before in our circular flow model, the government wasn't involved, well, now the government can do things to try to help money flow through the economy. Okay, so like for example, obviously the economy slows down, the government prints the stimulus checks. Unemployment insurance is another way. So the government is putting money into people's hands and sometimes businesses too. However, they also take out taxes. The government also buys things from private companies, right? When the government builds a new building, they're hiring a construction company to do that. So they can put money into the economy, keeping in mind that obviously when they do that, they've got to collect taxes. Okay, so the money flows through the economy with the help of the government in some cases. Um, but you can see on this diagram that what it's trying to say. Right? That is what I've got for you today. Okay. We'll see you guys here in the near future talking more about supply and demand.